Welcome to Rewiring Legal, a podcast series hosted by international law firm Bird Bird, where we explore how innovation and bold thinking are reshaping legal operations and procurement. My name's Christie, and I'm an associate in the commercial legal team here in Bird Bird's Dubai office. In this episode, we focus on the legal tech scene in the Middle East, with a spotlight on the UAE and Saudi Arabia. It's a space that's fast-moving, with both countries making bold moves to become global AI leaders and hubs of innovation. We'll be diving into what it means for lawyers, tech companies, and anyone curious about how this region's shaping the future of legal innovation. I am joined today by Ben Hughes.
I am Ben Hughes. I'm the Vice President of Legal Affairs at G42, which is one of the businesses within the G42 wider family of businesses. I have a specialty in commercial contracts, in particular technology contracts, and at G42, the sort of high-profile strategic deals. But then also as an in-house counsel, I'm also advising on intellectual property, cloud and AI regulatory issues, in particular data protection, data access under the US's Cloud Act, cross-border data controls, as well as the classic fare of corporate employment, real estate and litigation, if we end up in litigation, which we obviously hope we never do. But I'll put Core 42 into its context within G42. G42 was founded in 2018 and has grown since then to become a leading AI and cloud computing company whose focus is to underpin the UAE's digital transformation and then also enable enterprise AI, in particular for public sector and regulated industries, and also to deliver commercial and societal benefits and impact to the UAE itself, but also to other countries in the Middle East and further afield. I've been at the company since 2021, and I've worked on a number of strategic deals that, in particular, they have a partnership with Cerebrus, who manufacture these high-performance chips. Not massively technical, but I think they are a different kind of architecture to the NVIDIA chips or the AMD chips, which allows you to do better inferencing than you can do with those other kinds of chips. We partnered with them in 2023 to build a supercomputer, which was then expanded in 2024. Last year, we also got a $1.5 billion investment from Microsoft, which is another matter that I was heavily involved in.
I think a lot of people probably would have heard about the Microsoft deal, because that was out here, at least that was pretty big news.
Yeah, it got a lot of press.
You were at G42 initially, and then you moved to Core 42.
Yes. When I initially joined G42, the number of lawyers in the business was much smaller than it is now. So there were probably about 11 or 12 lawyers to begin with. We would help all of the G42 businesses. But then while I've been at the company, they've got bigger and bigger. And then that each individual business unit has developed its own legal team and its own general counsel function. I'm a member of the Core 42 business. I'm in the Core 42 legal team. But because of the fact that I've been in the company for a few years, I do also work for G42 sometimes.
It's probably also worth mentioning to our listeners that Ben was previously at Bird Bird.
Yes. Before I joined G42, I was at Bird Bird for 15 years, from a trainee until I left.
You're in the commercial team at Bird Bird, and I'm sure there's lots of people who will probably be listening to this podcast who fondly remember you.
Or not fondly. Some of them might remember me with a lot of antipathy. We just don't know.
Hopefully not. Based on the fact that Ben works for Core 42 and sort of the really exciting stuff that those guys are doing around AI. So how would you describe the AI landscape in the UAE right now in 3 words?
I would describe it as quick or accelerating, ambitious and strategic. And the reason for that is just from my own personal experience. The speed at which we did, for example, the Microsoft deal was quite impressive, I think.
How long was that?
I think it was less than 6 months. I wasn't engaged right from the outset, so I suspect there were conversations going on prior to that. Because when the decision is made that something's going to happen, then it happens quickly. The reason I say ambitious is because it's no secret that this region has relied a lot on the oil and gas industries, and then Dubai has obviously relied a lot on tourism. This foray into having a sort of technology industry is quite new for the Middle East region and also for the UAE. But they've really got the bit between their teeth. They're getting on with it. So there's a lot of ambition, and it's, it is impressive. And then the reason I say strategic is because, well, exactly that. You can see that the intentional decision to try to transition the economy from being focused on those industries to being much more multi-layered and more of a kind of diverse economy. So the way they see AI, I think, and it's borne out in the way that all these kinds of deals unfold and the partnerships unfold, is as a kind of strategic asset.
In the UAE, especially UAE and Saudi, I think it's quite clear that they're being very deliberate and strategic about what they're doing with AI, trying to sort of promote innovation without sort of stifling it in any way. And
absolutely,
you've got these guiding principles and ethics and stuff that you should bear in mind, but we're not going to put sort of anything legally binding in place. And I think the point that you mentioned on quick and fast-paced nature, I think tech companies by their very nature are pretty fast-paced, but AI in particular seems to be going at a really rapid pace.
I think that the way that the regulatory environment will unfold still remains to be seen. But what certainly seems to be true is there isn't a rush to create a piece of legislation like the EU's AI Act. If you were going to categorize countries according to, or regions according to how keen they are to create new AI-specific law, you've got places like the EU and China, which seem to be kind of keen on doing stuff like that. And then you've got places like the US, the UK, and I'd say the Middle Eastern countries, which are kind of playing more of a kind of wait and see game. Let's see what we need to regulate before we regulate.
There's kind of this like sort of lock between innovation and protecting the ethics of it all. It's interesting to see what different countries, what position they're sort of taking. I know we spoke before about how you got into it, but what actually drew you to this space? What drew you to get sort of more into AI?
Well, I've always been quite keen on technology. I've always been working in technology even before I became a lawyer. I worked in the IT department of 2 different banks, and then I worked in China as a project manager at a company that was developing websites and interactive CD-ROMs. And then I decided that I actually wanted to become a lawyer, and because being a project manager had made me into a sort of contract manager, and I became interested in what the contract said, and then I went and did the conversion course. So I've always had this interest in technology and working in tech companies, which is also what led me to want to work at Bird and Bird. During the pandemic, a recruiter contacted me about a couple of opportunities, of which this was one. And I was just attracted to it because I thought that AI was going to become a big thing. And I'd already been starting to investigate it when I was at Bird and Bird with some of the other lawyers. And it just sort of fell into my lap as a thing to do. And it just seemed like a good time to do it. I mean, it was during the pandemic. I was just up for an adventure.
We said before we started, this kind of gives you a bit of a life's too short mentality, doesn't it? And you kind of just think, yeah, what have you got to lose?
I don't have any regrets. Yeah, it's been good fun. It continues to be good fun.
Before moving out here, I was based in London, and the majority of my work was actually focused around data protection, and then would do, as I said to you before, a lot of the sort of contractual stuff on the tech side. And then before I moved out here, would dabble a little bit in AI, but as we were saying, ChatGPT and the large language models weren't really a thing sort of pre-COVID.
That would give you a good grounding in the skills you need to think about AI issues. The data protection questions, just like the intellectual property questions, are kind of key to what sorts of legal risks might start to emerge.
Yeah, there's a lot of crossover. Having that experience from a European perspective has been really helpful on the AI front, as you mentioned, but also the UAE and Saudi in particular have got their own data protection laws, and very similar concepts sort of common throughout. So we often hear about the UAE being a regional leader in tech. From your perspective, where does the UAE or Middle East generally, where does that really stand in global AI?
Well, I think that, like I said, it is extremely impressive, the ambition and the achievements that have happened in a relatively short space of time, basically going from not having a presence in the technology industry to having a position where they are really able to shape the discussion in a way that you just wouldn't have expected. You also see some very tangible things. So we talked about the Microsoft investment, but back in 2007, for example, Mababla invested in AMD. They also created Global Foundries, which is another chip company. They invested in Waymo, self-driving car company. The UAE has got the world's first ministry for AI. I don't know if any other countries have done that, but I know that the UAE was the first country that has done that.
And university as well.
Yep, they created the first AI university who do a lot of research into AI and were instrumental in the development of JACE, which was the first large language model in Arabic. There are lots of other examples of partnership arrangements between the UAE and different tech players as they build out the AI infrastructure and build out the ecosystem generally. So, I mean, the very fact that we're sitting here talking about this and that we can be gainfully employed is testament to the fact that that ecosystem is very much alive and well.
When it comes to what the UAE is doing with AI, how do you think that's sort of different to what the approach that the rest of the world is taking? I know we briefly touched on it earlier in terms of the EU is taking a very sort of ethics.
I mean, I think there is a firm commitment to responsible AI within the UAE. I mean, it's part of the national strategy of AI, very clearly talks about the need for safety and transparency and ethical algorithms to be, and, safety by design.
Yeah.
All of those things are very much in the forefront of people's minds. And also on the deals I've worked on, that has been baked into the contractual documentation, the need to ensure that that is how you do things. So, and setting up policies and procedures and teams of people who will make sure that that happens when AI solutions are being developed.
Yeah.
I think the only difference is really one of attitude towards whether you think that it's a good idea to create a piece of primary legislation like the AI Act, or whether you rely more on the kinds of mechanisms that I've just described. And I think that the UAE isn't different from places like the UK and the US in the sense of wait and see what's required before we regulate approach. I think the other big difference is that, and this is where the UAE really distinguishes itself, I guess Saudi probably distinguishes itself as well, is this ability to be able to see AI as a national strategic asset, the keenness to use the national resources to build that asset out. That's not what you see in places like the US or the UK, where the state sees itself more as an enabler of private companies rather than as a investor.
The UAE Regulatory Intelligence Office, for example, they're using AI-powered integrated regulatory intelligence ecosystem to basically speed up the development of national legislation. And they've said that by using this AI-powered system, they're going to be able to pump out legislation that's needed 70 times quicker or something. There's a lot of noise around AI, and I think depending on who you ask and maybe their age might have something to play in this, but it's either the biggest revelation since the internet or just smoke and mirrors. Where do you land? Is it AI sort of overhyped or underhyped?
Well, I don't think you're going to get very many new industries that don't do some sort of hype. I mean, that's how you get people interested, is through advertising and marketing. I don't think it's any surprise that people want to, advertise their existence. When I say people, I mean businesses. They want people to get interested in their products. They want customers. That's just normal business activity. So that's one comment I'd make about that. The other comment I would say is that if you were to look into the future, it's difficult to imagine a future in which there is less AI or the same amount of AI as there currently is. There is always going to be more. So, of course, there's going to be excitement and hype, and some of that will turn out to be real and some of it will turn out to not be real. But the future is definitely going to involve there being more technology, not less technology. I mean, you only have to think about what has happened over the past few years in terms of the consumer things that you have access to. So now, like we were just discussing, we've got ChatGPT, which we didn't have before. We have Spotify, telling us what our music tastes should be. We've got an expectation that AI will be probably involved in diagnosing us if we're not very well. I mean, if that's not happening already, we kind of can foresee that happening in the future. We can see AI being used to help to improve yields when it comes to growing crops, finding new supplies of oil and gas, or maybe other natural resources that exist underneath the soil somewhere. I don't see a future in which there isn't going to just be more of that kind of stuff. I think the real question is more about how do we handle it, both as individuals and as a society, to make sure that we don't become overwhelmed by the amount of new technology that we are dependent on and also using. That's really where I think the focus will inevitably be, is making sure that we get the most out of these technologies and that they don't start to invade our lives in ways that we don't actually want, or that we, if we stopped and thought about it, we don't want. I mean, one thing that happened to me on Sunday was my wife wants to buy some new sunglasses. So I started looking at the Meta Ray-Bans. I mean, it's more on the question of, is it overhyped? Because there is clearly lots of excitement about the idea of creating new killer consumer products.
Yeah.
Like we have the iPhone, which was released in 2008, 2009, which has become, and smartphones generally have become the kind of main go-to thing that we pull out of our pockets when we're bored. But they are now so ubiquitous that there isn't very much innovation left to be done other than just making better cameras, better Google Maps, better Uber. The actual way in which we interact with things seems to be plateauing at the moment.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting to go into a shop and play around with something like the Meta Ray-Bans. Try to imagine what it might be like in the future if you're relying on something like that. Because I don't know if I really want this. Speaking frankly, I quite like the fact that I've just got a normal pair of glasses.
I think when you mention AI to most lay people, they probably think ChatGPT or Meta sunglasses or the Apple Vision stuff.
Which is normal, right? You think about the things that you actually use.
Yeah,
Not necessarily the things that are going on behind the scenes that you don't use.
exactly. So what would you say from your perspective are the most sort of exciting use cases that you've seen AI?
Well, I think the really exciting ones are actually the ones that we don't really use, like being able to diagnose people who've got cancer quickly and then deal with it, or finding things underneath the earth which we didn't know they were there but were going to be really useful to us.
Yeah.
Or helping to expedite the transition of the economy to being less reliant on hydrocarbon fuels. So those are the kinds of things that are super exciting. But sitting here as a lawyer who doesn't really understand exactly how all of that works, I can't hand on heart to you say all of that's going to suddenly make life better. But you can kind of, just as a citizen, you can see that that could well be the way it's going to unfold.
It makes things more efficient, quicker, faster. So I'm sure there's plenty of things that you can't talk about, but in terms of what G42 projects they're working on at the moment or that you're working on.
The main ones I've already mentioned. So we've got the existing partnerships and continuing to build on those partnerships. The thing that is soaking up a lot of my time at the moment is we're building out high performance computing capacity in the US and in Europe, and also hopefully in further afield in the global south. So that's what I've mainly been spending my time on, is working on the framework arrangements to enable that to happen.
Again, we've kind of touched on this already, but if we fast forward to, we've mentioned 2030. 2030 is kind of Saudi's thing. 2031 is the UAE's thing. But what do you think the Middle East AI ecosystem looks like if things go right?
Well, I think it will continue to be a progression of what we've been discussing. So it'll be more of the same, but bigger and better. Yeah. And I think there will be an even more sophisticated and established ecosystem of professionals and technologists who will be working in the region or coming in and out of the region. And there'll be stronger ties between the traditional players in Silicon Valley, also in Europe and the Middle East. I think we'll just continue to see more and more interaction between the existing ecosystem. The other thing to think about is that, like I described, the way I got hired and brought to the region was a kind of case in point of how the ecosystem is actually global. Although people talk a lot about the fact that a lot of people say, oh, globalization is over, but it actually isn't really when you look at the deals that you work on day by day. people need to be moved from one part of the world to the other in order to do a job. It might be working as a lawyer, it might be working as a coder, it might be working as some sort of designer of AI systems. Then they might do that for a bit and then move to California or move back wherever they come from.
Deal with Microsoft. Yeah, perfect example.
Those kinds of things, I think, will continue to happen.
I think the potential developments that we'll see in the medical space are probably, from the research that I've done, are probably the sort of most exciting, like the point that you mentioned before.
Sure, yeah.
Going back to a topic that we've sort of already previously touched on is ethics and governance and responsibility. So I guess as AI scales up, there's a lot of talk about it being ethical, transparent, and sort of developing trust amongst its users. These are like pretty common themes that we're already used to seeing in data privacy, for example. So how do you think those conversations are being played out in the UAE? I know there's been quite a lot of policies already that have been published that provide ethical guidelines that companies must sort of bear in mind when developing AI.
Yeah, I think that it will continue to play itself out. I mean, we've sort of touched on this, but I feel like in the Middle East, in the US and in Britain, my sense is the likelihood of there being an EU AI Act type piece of primary legislation is not that high. I would expect it to be more driven by a form of self-regulation in which principles like safety, inclusion, transparency are the main watchwords, and that companies agree to comply with those basic principles when they are developing AI solutions, rather than needing to adhere to a piece of primary legislation. I think that's the way I see it unfolding.
I think we mentioned it before. I think it just, in a sense, could put companies off if they see somewhere like the UAE where there aren't these sort of strict laws around developing AI, and it's seen to be much more of a sort of innovative culture, and you just have these sort of guiding principles. I think that's a lot more attractive for companies.
Yeah, you have to strike the right balance, though, don't you? Because you've got to, on the one hand, make sure that you're not stifling innovation, but then on the other hand, you also need to be building trust.
Yeah.
So I think there needs to be an understandable set of principles that people know are being followed and have assurance that are being followed, so that they have trust in AI systems, want to use them, and don't feel like that something could go wrong. But then on the other hand, you don't want there to be a straitjacket that prevents there from being innovation. Because I think so. The advantage of something like the EU's AI Act is it's relatively clear, at least what the objective is, and it's laid down in a piece of law. The disadvantage is that it could stifle innovation. The advantage of having a kind of set of guidelines is that it probably helps to promulgate innovation. Disadvantage of it is that it could be seen to be window dressing. That's what governments and regulators need to decide. Which priority are they going to go for?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because the term transparency gets banded around so much, and I think from a data protection perspective, it's pretty clear on how are transparent to people in terms of how you're processing their data. But with respect to AI and large language models, for example, I'm not really too sure how you necessarily open and transparent with people in terms of how you use their data and just being sort of as transparent as possible. I'm not sure how you necessarily achieve that.
That's a big question, isn't it? I think that being able to, on some level, explain to people how the system works in a way that the layperson can get their head around is probably the key. But, even with data protection, people aren't necessarily that clear on how their data are being processed. When people first started using Facebook, they may not have been aware of the fact that their data potentially can be used to deliver ads.
Yeah.
Or they might not have been aware that their data were going to be processed outside of their country, because they might not have fully thought about the fact that the servers are in different countries to the country where they are. Even if the information about that had been made available to them, they might not have sort of really focused that much on it. Yeah, there's the concept of transparency is good, but it also requires people to be interested in actually finding out how these things work. And some people are and some people aren't. It just depends.
Yeah, exactly. Probably like a general awareness raising piece that needs to be done. But yeah, I agree. Like, how do you explain how these super complex programs and work to people in an easily understandable way? I think is pretty difficult. Do you think what the UAE is doing with AI, do you think they're doing enough to build AI responsibly?
I think, yeah, this is sort of famous last words type, but yeah, because you never know what the future may hold. There could be some app that gets created which causes problems, but I think the intention to create ethical and safe AI is definitely there. I mean, it's written into the UAE's national AI strategy. So, and as I said, it's also baked into many of the partnership arrangements. Yeah. So everybody is focused on this as an objective. That's great.
Or doing the right things. So if there's one AI tool or app that you personally couldn't live without, what would it be?
Probably there isn't one, because I'm trying to use my phone less, not more. But I do get addicted to asking ChatGPT stupid questions.
It's fun, isn't it?
And then asking it to give me the answer in the style of William Wordsworth or Winston Churchill or something like that, just to see if it can do that. But I couldn't say that there's an app that I couldn't live without. I could probably live without a smartphone if I needed to.
Yeah, I would like to say same, but unfortunately probably couldn't live without my phone. And at the moment, there's a huge push internally for us to use sort of legal AI tools, just become, I guess, more efficient lawyers. I guess we're trying to sort of integrate those into our sort of day-to-day working.
Yeah, we're doing the same. We're using Harvey. We're also trialing a few other ones as well. I mean, we're trying to see how to make sure that we can use it in a way that gives us reliable outputs. But I don't think we've yet landed on a way of doing things which we're confident is always going to deliver reliable outputs yet. So it's a bit like when we first started using practical law or legal databases. To begin with, there was still a library. I remember this at Bird Bird. I don't know if there still is a library, but there used to be a physical library that you could go to if you needed to find out the law on a particular subject. And then that sort of got phased out, I think it's been phased out. Yeah, and people tended to just go on Westlaw and LexisNexis and practical law. They needed to find out a piece of information. So it feels to me like this is kind of similar to that. It's like we need to be able to build up trust in these new tools and be confident that they're going to deliver the same reliable information to us, or the same legal work product that we are used to producing and that we want to be able to produce and give to the client.
Yeah, agreed. I think once you sort of get to grips with how to work with it, again, build up that trust, I think it'll be a really useful tool. Okay, so last question. If you weren't working for G42, Core 42, or in the legal sector, what would you be doing?
I would probably be swimming.
Swimming?
Yeah. But not professionally, just
having a dip.
Just having a dip, yeah.
Okay, nice. Okay, Ben, cheers. Thanks for your time. That's been great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We hope you found this discussion valuable, and please do keep an eye out for the next episode in our series, where we'll continue the discussion on how legal operations and procurement are being transformed by innovation and bold thinking.